Okay, I'm going to go through. I'm going to show you how to do the conform for this new, what we're calling a resolve hub method of dealing with footage. So just as a quick kind of overview of how this works is, in the past, we would just dump footage to dailies and then sort it out. And if frame rates were different from 2398, we would make copies of the footage and then change the frame rates to 2398, assuming that you were going to overcrank that footage. And it becomes such a pain in the butt when you're dealing with a huge project like this. So I came up with this kind of more efficient way of using Resolve as the, I'm calling it a footage hub. So you import all your footage into Resolve first, all the camera raw footage, and you can use it as a way to kind of get an overview of the footage and see if there's any problematic material, different frame rates, files that don't have real names, things like that. And I have another video that I'll send you a link to give you kind of a more detailed overview of how that works. But for this particular project, that's how we did it. So anything that was edited in offline was transcoded out of Resolve first as the transcoding tool, rather than using Edit Ready or anything like that, or using the built-in Premiere proxy workflow, which we found is very problematic when you have files that have, we have to change the frame rates and all that kind of stuff with. It's just more trouble than it's worth. So the idea is to bring everything into Resolve, transcode it out first to ProRes proxy for editorial. Editor edits with the proxies. And then when the timeline is locked and it's ready for color correction, I will take the offline project, export the XML of that timeline, bring it back into the same project that created all those transcoded proxies, and theoretically, everything relinks to the original camera footage perfectly. I don't have to go hunting down footage or manually relink things. So it's a real huge time saver when we're working in workflows. And I can, while I do this, I'll show you why that is. So that's just a quick overview. So let me start from ground zero. And this is my typical workflow when I do the conform on any project. I will, there's this color folder that if it's not been created already, you want to create. And I have a script. There's this thing called post haste that I won't get into it now, but it will automatically create all these folders automatically. But you can do it manually. Just copy whatever conventions I have. You don't need to copy all these things for the conform process, but pPro, conform, and usually source media are the ones that I have. Okay, so the first thing I do is I go to the offline folder, look at pPro offline, and just make a copy of the offline project. So you want to make sure that you have the most current version of the project. So obviously date modified is how you can check that, but maybe double check with the editor before you do that. So I'll just take this. So this is just this timeline has not been approved yet, but I'm just going through the motions of it just so you can see how this works. So you can see what I did there is I made a copy of the offline project. I never want to open up the original offline. I want to make a copy of it before I open it. I don't want to mess with the offline in any way possible, just out of paranoia and safety. So what I do is I copy that offline project to my color folder into the pPro conform folder. And just so there's no confusion, I usually append the word temp and just a random gibberish. I have a shortcut that just timestamps it, just so I know that that's kind of a temp file. So now I have this conform project. This is where I'm not doing the color correction in this project. This is just to stage all the offline media to send to Resolve. So this is where I prepare the timelines, get rid of graphics, all the stuff that I need to do to send an XML to Resolve. So I'll open up that project. Okay, so here's my empty project. So you can see I have an offline import folder. So now what I'm going to do is I want to open up the offline project, and I'm opening the copy of the offline. Okay, so there's the offline, and so I want to. Looks like I have a. Let's hit offline. Don't need all the render files. And if you get things with graphics and fonts, don't worry about it because I don't need any of that stuff for the color correction stuff. Just to make sure that I'm going to assume that VO6. Let's just say VO6G is the timeline I'm working on. And I'm going to right click on it and then make sure that link media is grayed out. We got that unlinked media when I opened up the project, so I don't know where it was. But since if that's the timeline I'm working on, if I go right click on it, as long as it doesn't say link media, that means all the footage is linked. So I don't need to worry about that one clip it was complaining about. Okay, so the next thing you do in this copy of the offline project is you create a bin. I create a bin, this is since Deb edited this, I create a bin called DLM bins. And I copy all the other bins in that project into that because I don't want to see any of these bins polluting my particular structure. So I dump everything in there except for the offline. And so I'll just drag this offline. In fact, I should append offline to this. And then drag this into the offline import folder in the conform project. And there it is. Okay, so now I can close this project since I don't need it anymore. And so you can see all the bins from her project are in this DLM bin, so it doesn't pollute my project file. That's just a little housekeeping thing I like to do. Oh, one thing you want to make sure is hopefully the editor has exported out a reference of that timeline. And I don't see it here. So if there's no reference of the offline, you want to do that first things first. Okay, so we're just going to export the in and out points here since there's obviously stuff on the end of this timeline that Deb is still, I guess, pulling from, but we don't care. In this case, we just want the main bulk of the 30. So we're going to export the offline reference. Just use previews. Well, actually, don't use previews. One little tip when we're making offline reference movies for conform, for color, and not necessarily for client review, is I actually like to leave this time interpolation set to frame sampling, even though there may be optical flow speed changes in the timeline. The reason is because when you obviously have optical flow, it's creating new frames out of nothing just to make it look smooth. But Resolve has different algorithms for that. So if you bring in this reference to Resolve and try to do a frame by frame comparison, sometimes frames don't match up and it kind of confuses the conform process. If you leave it on frame sampling, it'll just skip frames or repeat frames to match it. So it's a lot easier to make sure that you've got the timeline reference aligning with the XML import. That's just a little thing I like to do when I make references for conform. So let's export this, and I export this to my ref conform folder in the color folder. Okay, so we exported the offline. So now, next thing I do, so I want to keep this offline in this conform project as a reference. It's kind of a standalone reference of the offline in case I ever need to go back. And I will need to go back to it because what's going to happen is when I do the round trip from Resolve, the color corrected files from Resolve back to Premiere for the online, I'm going to just use this offline, copy it, and it become promoted to an online project and just paste the color corrected clips over the offline. And just to use it as all this offline clips as a reference. So what I'll do now is I copy this offline and now move it to up here to Resolve. Then I'll change this to Resolve. Okay. So in this project, in fact, in this offline project, I'm going to lock the tracks just as a safety thing. So in essence, I never need to go back to the original offline project that Deb is working in. This is a safety measure. So we'll close this. Now, the goal here now is to get rid of all the stuff I don't need to send to Resolve. So obviously it means all this stuff, which I don't need. This stuff. So lock all the video track, and I'll get rid of all the audio. I don't need audio. It's information I don't need. So we move that, and then these clips, I'm going to remove the slate, remove all graphics. Actually, one thing you can do is you go Command F, and then if you want to just kind of do it all in one fell swoop, just select, I'm trying to get rid of all the graphics. So if I just do a search, find in timeline, go find all, media type contains still, all those stills select, and just hit delete. This, so, and then when you see stuff like this, we've got stack clips. You just want to turn off the bottom just to see what's going on. Is that just an alternate take, which it is. Sometimes it'll be like a split screen composite. And so obviously you need to send both of those clips to Resolve. But in this case, it looks like it's just an alternate cut for that particular edit. So I can just get rid of that. The same deal here. Let's turn this off. Okay, same deal. Okay, so now, and then we can delete unused tracks. Okay, so next we're going to do, I want to find out what kind of filters and things I have on here. So I select those clips and go remove attributes, which may seem counterintuitive, but this will show you what's on those clips. So generally, I don't care about any of this stuff. Time remapping, turn that off because we don't want to obviously remove that at this stage. It's hard to find which clips have time remapping, but primarily you want to concern yourself with color and any kind of filter that affects the color, the brightness, anything with color of the original clips, because that information will actually get carried through the XML file and back to the round trip into Premiere. So if you have a Lumetri color filter on something, it gets applied to the color corrected clip when Resolve writes the XML back for Premiere. So you want to get rid of at least that stuff. So in this case, let's get rid of that. And warp, when you see warp stabilizer, oops. So when you see warp stabilizer, yeah, so all that's left is warp stabilizer. So then I'll find the clips that have warp stabilizer on it. Okay, so it's only that clip. I just color it just so it stands out. So I will make a note here, timeline note, and just call this say warp stabilizer. So you can do the stabilization in Resolve. So that's an option. You don't have to. So this is, I'll make a decision usually on the fly. Sometimes Resolve does a worse job of stabilizing the Premiere. So actually I will end up just using warp stabilizer back in the online project to restabilize a clip that I color corrected out of Resolve. So I just put that note there just so I can see that. In fact, I make it a range marker. It's easier to see. Oop, it's a little too long. Okay. So theoretically, when I bring this XML into Resolve, that I will see that there's a range marker and I can click on it and see, oh, that needs to be stabilized. So I can make the decision if Resolve stabilizes it or not. So if you forget to do that, that's not that big a deal. I'm just letting you know that that's a kind of workflow that I do. Okay, so the next thing you can see here, let me maximize the timeline here. So obviously you can see that all the clips are underscore proxy files. And these originally came from Arri Alexa 4K footage, ProRes 444, but these have been transcoded down to 1080 smaller ProRes proxy versions for offline. Okay, so what you're not seeing here, and where this differs from previous kind of offline workflows, some of these clips, especially like the drone clips, like this clip, anything that has the drone D is the drone clips. And these were recorded in camera at like 5994. But you're not, the intention was not for it to play back at that frame rate because we're actually editing in a 2398 timeline. So a lot of times what would happen in the past is you'd find this clip, reveal in project, and then go to modify interpret footage, and then force the frame rate to 23976. Even though the original, it would say up here 5994, you would go assume this frame rate is 2398 instead. So it'll play back slow-mo in the timeline. But with this new Resolve Hub workflow, we actually bake in that speed change in the proxy. So it's everything, unless there's very specific exceptions to that rule when it comes to like, you have to sync audio or stuff. But generally, anything that's not 2398, we will transcode it. We'll do the same thing as you would have done in Premiere with that, what I just showed you, that interpret footage frame rate thing. But we do this in Resolve first. Okay, so let me go back to Resolve and I'll open up the project that created these files. So I actually have to import the project. Okay, so you can see Karen has created, every time new footage comes in, she exports a DRP file as a backup project. And that's the project that would open up. So as long as everything's linked on the same network, all the media should link in Resolve. Okay, so the first thing I'll do when I create this conform project is I'll rename this project because what I'm doing now is, well, let me just open this up first so you can see what's going on. When you get these permissions, capture path stuff, don't worry about it. This is just, you can obviously change the settings. Don't worry about that for now. Just hit ignore. Okay, so this project is the project that was used to ingest all the original camera media, and in Resolve created all these smart bins as a way to it gives you a quick overview of the characteristics of all the media. So we created all these smart bins to weed out all the different aspect ratios that were shot. They weren't all shot 16:9. So we had to make a note of that when we were transcoding the proxies. We had to create separate timelines for each of these different aspect ratios. You can see the resolutions here. So yeah, weird resolutions like that, 145 square, and then we get a 189 here, 2048, and then standard 16:9, 3840. Okay, so, and then there's a bunch of smart bins here that show initially what the original frame rates are. So one smart bin of note is this thing called frame rate conformed. So just for sake of argument, let's just pretend that this was a 5994 clip, okay? And all these clips are 5994, but we know that we want to edit with that material at 23976 to get an overcrank look. If we know that that's the case, what we're going to do is kind of do exactly what we did in Premiere, except in Resolve. So if you select all the clips in Resolve and go clip attributes, you can actually force that frame rate here, do the same thing. Okay, and it'll change it to 2390, which has already been done here. And when we do that, before we do that, we always put a little tag on those clips just to make a note of what the actual original frame rate was, because we need to know that. You need to be able to see that this was actually conformed, because there's no like metadata that tells you that you've changed the frame rate. So just to avoid any confusion. But these were shot at 24 instead of 2398, which actually does matter, right? And there's some clips that were, let's see. Yeah, you can see here, all these drone clips here were originally 5994, but we all conformed in 23976. So the idea behind this Resolve Hub footage prep idea is that you do all the prep of the footage, you sort everything out, you add real names if they're missing, which is also super important, and you change frame rates if necessary before you do any transcodes of proxies. Okay, so in the end, even though these clips are 24 on disk, even though these clips are 5994 on disk, as far as Resolve is concerned, it is a 23976 clip. Now, it basically doesn't even care that it's 5994 because you've changed the frame rate, and as far as it's concerned, it's that frame rate. And so any time codes and stuff that may change because you've done the frame rate, it's still in this project. So in a way, you can think of Resolve as a database of the footage and what you did to the footage. So if you're going to create new proxy footage from all this footage you've massaged and changed the attributes of, those proxies will share the same time code, same real names, same everything as the original clip after you've done all this kind of changing of frame rates and stuff like that. So why that's awesome is that when the editor edits with those proxies back in Premiere, A, they don't have to go and do that manual frame rate interpretation thing. And B, because Resolve does not read that information, Resolve has no idea that a Premiere XML clips in a Premiere XML have been interpreted. In the past, it was a real pain in the butt because when I bring an XML file of an offline, I go, why is this clip not, why are the in and out points not aligning? It takes me a while to figure out. It's like, oh, the editor changed the frame rate interpretation in the offline and didn't tell me or didn't make a note of it. And, in fairness to the editor, Premiere does not make it obvious that that's happened. So you always bang your head against the wall and you go, oh, it was that frame rate thing. This workflow eliminates that. The editor can just edit normally. They can do speed changes to things. They can do whatever they do, not have to worry about that stuff. And so what happens now, keep in mind that a lot of these clips were originally 5994 on disk or 24 or any other frame rate, but they are all being edited in the timeline as 2390 clips. So aesthetically, that's what they were looking for. So now what I'm going to do is I'm going to export this XML file. I'm going to export the offline as an XML. And then, so where I save that stuff is in the color folder, XML, and then I go to Resolve. And then you might get a complaint about translation report, can't issues account. Don't worry about that. You almost always get that. It almost never not pops up. So we go back to Resolve. So again, this project, this is the original media prep project. I imported that project back up into Resolve. So what I can do now is rename this. So I'm going to conform this Molokai Noelani. So I'll rename this project, call it Molokai Noelani. I'll just keep it Noelani, and then I'll go conform. I'll just go color conform. Okay. So now I've made this the original project. Even though it's got all the footage, that's what we want. Since I'm going to be conforming the Molokai project, I just want to make sure the project that has all the original media that we've prepared before transcoding proxies, I want all that media in there. So now what I'll do is import the XML file. One thing you also want to make sure when you do this is your project file. It should be set, but you always want to make sure, just don't assume that this setting general options assist using real names for the embedding and source code file. That's super important in this workflow because sometimes you'll add real names to clips before transcoding the proxies. And those proxies will have that real name embedded in. So we want that enabled. So it just makes the conform more automatic. So let's go import XML. Find that XML file just imported. Okay, so in this case, normally when you do a XML import, generally in a lot of workflows from Premiere, you want to go automatically import source clips in the media pool, which, obviously if it's still linked on disk, it brings those files in. You don't need to do that because all the media is in the media pool already, even though they're not the proxies, they're actually the camera originals. But the way Resolve works is that it'll figure out that the real names, time codes, durations, all the things match between the offline proxies and the camera proxies. So it'll automatically relink to it. To turn that off, use sizing information you turn on, automatically set project settings, yeah, keep that on too, and hit OK. And it'll go, where's the media I should be looking to relink to? And for this particular workflow, you can actually just click master and it'll search the entire project. So hit OK. And there you go, you can see. So what we'll do now is we'll import the reference movie and create a bin called reference. So I'll import that reference movie we exported, which is in ref conform. Okay, now I'm going to put this over the top of the timeline we just imported. Oop. Okay, and then let me just unlink the audio. Just unlink the audio. And make sure this inspector is enabled, turned on, and opened up. And you can turn off media pool for now, just so you have more screen space there. So now what you're going to do is you're going to do the difference mode comparison trick. So we're going to compare the baked offline reference to the clips that just came in via XML import. So you drop the reference into difference mode and just kind of scrub through it and see if anything. Obviously, there's no graphics on this import, so you're seeing the only difference in the reference and the imported clip is that there's graphics on it. So that's fine. What you're looking for, actually, you can probably, if you can, let's mute this. You can just hit play, and if your computer is fast enough, it'll play in real time in difference mode. It looks like everything's aligned. There's a little tiny bit of difference. You can see little white edges, only because it's the difference in compression. Those are the little differences. As long as you don't see huge areas of kind of like big chunks of white or bright areas, which shows that the clips are not aligning, then it's not a big deal. You can see these things on the edge here. It's because there's black bars on the. So here's an example of where the clips are not aligning perfectly. So you can see that. So if you switch it out of difference mode and then kind of toggle that clip on and off, oh, you can see it looks like the only difference is really the scale of it. So let's go. Let's find where her mouth is slightly open. Let's see. And then turn it on and off. Yeah, so it looks like that's the only difference. The frames are actually aligning. It's just the, oh, this is because, and there you go. So this is why you put the note. You can see that the note we put in Premiere, this is the clip that got warp stabilized. So that's why the scaling is slightly different. So in this case, this is good. This conform is fine. It just doesn't have stabilization applied to it. That's why its scaling is bigger in the reference versus the raw clip. So that's another reason why it's good to have those comments or these markers put in Premiere first, because then you go, how come this is not aligning? And then you go, oh yeah, there's a warp stabilizer. So let's go back to difference mode and just keep going. There's actually an easier way to do this difference mode trick. I'm not going to complicate this video by showing you that, but just suffice to say, there's an easier way to do this. It just adds more complexity to the video here. Okay, so looks like that came in pretty much perfectly. And what's awesome about that is a lot of these clips had originally different frame rates, but we all conformed the frame rates in Resolve before transcoding to 2398. So as long as the editor uses those same proxies you've created, those clips will relink exactly as intended as far as the reconform frame rates when you bring that offline XML back into Resolve. So that's kind of why this workflow is really neat, because okay, you can see here there's a little bit of difference here. One thing to note about Resolve conforms of Premiere XMLs, let's bring this back into normal, is that speed changes, even static speed changes, many of them, they come in close enough but not perfect. So you can see this clip at 2023. Let's go back to Premiere. So this clip had a speed change applied to it. So if you go Command J, you can see that's 90% exactly. For some reason, when you bring that XML into Resolve, it makes the speed 89.93. It never gets it perfect. I don't know why. But that's the reason why you'll see those little discrepancies here and there. When you're conforming a timeline, so in order to do media manage, when you trim off the unused parts of the clip, that's not a super big deal, as long as it's not totally off. A little discrepancy here of a frame or two is fine, because you're gonna trim the media with adequate handles to cover any of that. So if you got a big project, I wouldn't worry about trying to get this perfectly aligned. But just suffice to say, if you do have the time and you can force the speed change to match properly, it's good to do that. And then bring it back in the difference point. You might need to slip it, and slip and slide in Resolve. Another trick in Resolve, there's this little lock here with the two arrows going left and right. This is called the position lock. When you have that enabled, you can actually slip the set. You can't do anything to a timeline to alter the timing of clips. So if I try to pick this clip up while this position lock is enabled, I can't do anything. So I like to keep that enabled when I'm doing conform work, because I don't want to accidentally nudge a clip. And I still find Resolve's trimming tools to be a little weird. It's a little not like how you might do it in in Premiere, because you can see the cursor, how the cursor changes. The way Resolve defines a slip versus slide is what area of the clip you actually have the pointer over, and it changes the mode of it. So sometimes I'll accidentally slide a clip where I really want to slip it within the edit, which is that. So sometimes this saves me from that mistake. So just to let you know. So in this case, I want to slip this just to get the clips into registration, and you won't get a perfect registration. In fact, I should probably in here retime. Okay. So in Resolve, the retime, the optical flow and frame blending options are in this inspector, and in retime and scaling, if you double click on it, it defaults, well, in this case, it's defaulting the frame blend. So that's the reason why we're not getting an actual match. If I change this to nearest, which is effectively the same as what was the setting in Premiere? It was this one, frame sampling. That's the same thing. So it's not doing any interpolation. It's showing you the actual frame at that point. So that's the reason why you want export references with nearest rather than any kind of frame blending, because it makes it easier to make sure you got the right frame. So yeah, so now it obviously not going to match perfectly because you can see these black bars is it's just how on some Arri Alexa cameras it records with black bars in the sides, and when we made the transcodes we cropped those out. So the original clip is actually showing the black bars. That's the reason why we're seeing that in difference mode here. Okay, so yeah, we got a pretty good conform here. So now if you could just directly color correct with this now, but because obviously I'm working remotely, in order to get this media to me, I don't want to have to copy, the entirety of the source clip because I won't ever need it. So what we're going to do now is use the media manager to trim off all that excess media. Okay, so let's go to the edit page here. One thing you need to do, and let me just go through the motions to show you what happens. And I'm not sure if this is a bug or if this is a feature in Resolve, but let me show you what happens. Okay, so what I want to do is I want to collect this media and trim off the unused parts of the clip so I can easily copy the media. Okay, so we'll go up to the media manager. We're going to trim this media. So we'll go to File. Oh, interesting. Oh yeah, this is a little quirk. I think it's a bug. Resolve is full of bugs in case you haven't noticed, but it's all worth it. When you see media management grayed out like this, usually the cause of that is you need to have this media pool panel open when you invoke the media manager. I'm not sure if that's again a bug or feature, but now you can see media management is available. So just a little tip there. So choose media management. And if you go timelines, we want to trim a timeline, which is this timeline. We'll choose a destination to write all the trimmed media to. So where I like to put those is in a folder called collected media. And in that folder, I'll create another subfolder called source trimmed. And then specifically for this workflow, I like to get as specific as possible for what I am trimming. So in this case, I'm trimming the project. Let's actually bring this back down here so we can see it. It's 30, Noelani 30 VO6G. So just for future proofing sake, in case the timelines get edited after they're supposedly locked, which happens quite a bit, I will get very specific and call this 30 VO6G. So the media I'm trimming is only for this iteration of that sequence. And here's another example of Resolve's terrible user interface design, is that these timelines get truncated. But if you mouse over it for a second, a little pop-up shows. So this is the one we want to media manage. So check that. Here's where you go copy and trim media using 30 frames of handles. I think it defaults to this. If you enable that, it's going to copy the entire source clip. So obviously 250 gigabytes to recreate this 130, which obviously we don't want. Whereas if you do that, it only has to collect 13.8 gigs. Preserve folder hierarchy you want to keep on. You can usually 0 or 1 is fine. It's fine. You can keep it at 0. Now you see here, there's an issue here where usually you want to relink to the files that it trims. But there's a deal in Resolve where if you have more than one timeline in the project, it doesn't let you enable that for some reason. So there is a workaround for that. It's a cancel. Okay, so the workaround for this, there's some times when you're going to want to have to trim like multiple variations of a campaign within the same project. So the workaround I'm about to show you doesn't completely cover that workflow, but I have another video that I'll put a link to that shows how to deal with that situation. In this case, we're only concerned with one spot. And in this case, we're only concerned with one timeline. So we can just do it. And this is a simple way of solving this problem. One thing I like about Resolve is its smart bins. It's really useful for problem solving or just organization. So it's basically like a smart, kind of like rules in your email program. You can sort things based on criteria, and it doesn't copy media. It just shows you a view into, it's like a search, smart search kind of thing, like in Premiere. So if I create a smart bin called timelines, you may not have to do this. Depending on your project settings, there may be an actual timelines smart bin already created for you, but just to show you how this generally works in case it doesn't do that, make a smart bin called timelines, media pool properties, clip type is, and then you select timeline. So this will show you in a flats in the view all the timelines that are in the project. Now, all these timelines here are the timelines we created to for transcoding the proxies. In this case, we don't really need that because this is only used for the initial sorting of media and converting or transcoding all the media to proxies. So we can literally delete all these timelines. And here's a test timeline that doesn't need to be there either. So now there's only one timeline in the project. So if we go back to File, Media Management, and go to Timelines, scroll up here, select that timeline again. 30 frames of handles, pretty decent. That's a generous amount of handles. That's good. Now you can see the relink to new files is enabled. Not sure why that, if that's, again, I'm not sure if that's a feature or not, but it's nonetheless annoying. But that's how you deal with that. So in this particular case, when we're just conforming to one timeline, that's not a big deal. You just delete all the other timelines, and then it'll enable itself. So again, keep preserved folder hierarchy. That's super important. So it keeps the original path of the camera media in this folder, just so you can track media down if you need to troubleshoot something. And so now it only needs to trim 13 gigs. So hit start. And say what you can see here. If you go to the collected media folder into source trimmed, so you can see it's preserving the original path. I mean, this is probably more path than needs to be preserved. Basically, everything up to it's really only, we don't need any of these folders. We just care about there. But everything under there, it's good to have that because you can backtrack to the original untrimmed media if necessary, if there's ever an issue or anything like that. That's what that preserve path option gives you. But you can see it's writing all the files. And there it's done. So it didn't look like it, but right now, if you find a media pool and then right click on that clip and go reveal in Finder, it'll link to the source trim clip. There's tons of folders that lead to it, but you can see that it's automatically relinked. So what you want to do is double check that though. If you have got weird time remaps or anything that you may have overlooked, sometimes the trimming process may screw up. And I still have position lock turned on. Position lock also prevents you from actually, I think, adding new clips to the timeline. So if in this case we want to redo the offline clip, we want to put that back in the timeline to compare it. So I need to turn that off. I love position lock though. It's saved my butt many, many times. Okay, so we're going to do the difference comparison again, just to make sure that the trimming process worked properly and didn't miss any frames. So again, those little minor little white areas is just differences in compression and tiny bit of scaling. So don't worry about it. And this is the frame rate or the speed change. So don't worry about that. We've already established that. If you want to just make sure, you just go on the first frame. Do a comparison. Looks like it's still one frame off. But again, because you've trimmed with enough handles, that's not a big deal. We have that frame somewhere. It's just not landing on that same frame. So I wouldn't necessarily worry about that. At least not at this stage. If the idea is just to get the stuff trimmed and conformed and able to be collected for me, for the remote colorist, it's more important to get enough frames in the handles to deal with that. And then if you want to go back and get that perfect, that's awesome, but don't sweat that quite just yet. So let's hit play again. And that's the warp stabilizer difference there. Okay, so everything aligned perfectly. Okay, so now you can delete that. So now what you'll do is, because Resolve is a database, the way the projects work in Resolve is it works on an internal database. So that DRP file that I imported here is not like a Premiere project. I mean, it's not like you open that and the project opens. It's literally just a backup that you import into your current installation of Resolve. So what needs to happen is you need to export this project as a DRP file, the Davinci Resolve project file, the backup. So you go export project, and instead of Resolve Hub projects where this came from, you want to put this in the associated color folder. Oh wait, I'm looking at dailies. I should look at projects. Yeah, so in the projects folder, in the color folder, Resolve projects. That's where you want to write this DRP file to. And so the way I have things set up on my end is that I have a chrono sync rule that actually connects to our NAS remotely. So I will sync this entire project folder starting from, well, in this case, since there's multiple projects within the campaign, I consider this the main project folder for this Molokai. I will sync the entire project file, assuming that you're not dumping 40 million terabytes of data into it, which you shouldn't. It's only 16 gigabytes. So for my purposes, for color correction and online, the only thing I really need is an exported reference of the offline and the collected media of the camera media, the original media for color correction. So as long as you can dump any file or folder in this folder now, and it will sync back to my computer at home, and I'll have my own local copy of that. And when I render new versions of the color correction files into this folder, Resolve Renders, it'll sync back to the NAS. So you can open up, when it comes time for me to open up an online project, I can do that. So really, in an ideal situation, if you have the time and you're willing to do it, it'll be great to actually set up the online project as well for me. So I can't remember if I did a video on this or you know how to do this, but I'll just go through it one more time. So now that we've determined that all the clips came in properly, before I even start color correcting, I'll set up the online round trip project for Premiere. So I'll go to the deliver page, select Premiere XML as the preset, change this to HQ, and I like to set this to render at source resolution. So even though we're working in a 1080 timeline and everything is scaled to fit, I like to render out the color corrected clips at this original resolution that it was recorded at camera. So if this is a 4K clip, I want to render it out at the original resolution and scaling and everything, except the only difference is that it's been color corrected. That way it's easier for actually the round trip when you conform back in Premiere, because then all you need to do is copy and paste scale attributes from the offline timeline, and everything theoretically aligns, and also gives you flexibility to deliver a 4K or whatever highest resolution possible in the future if you want to. So make sure that's set to render resolution, source resolution, and then all this other stuff. Unless you've got, you can keep it at square unless you've got anamorphic stuff. Don't worry about it. Another important thing when you enable this render at source resolution, the other thing you want to do is to enable the checkbox disable sizing and blanking output. I won't go into why, but just enable that, because otherwise, if you scale something in Resolve when you render with source resolution, it's going to look different in the render. So, I mean, you can enable these, but these probably don't really apply to this, especially because this is not our 3D camera roll stuff. But it doesn't hurt to turn that on. It slows things down, but not enough for it to matter. So in this case, let's match the handles of the source clips, which is 30 frames. Okay, and then audio you can turn off because I don't need audio. I'm just going to get an audio mix, so I don't need to render audio. And file, that's fine. Default is fine. Okay, so I changed the location of where these are getting written to. And that location is always going to be in the color folder and in the Resolve renders folder. And so I'm going to follow the same convention I did when I created the source trim folder. I'm going to call this V or 30 V06 of G. And maybe just put a hyphen just to make it easier to read. because guaranteed, eventually there's going to be some change, even though they say it's a lot cut. There's going to be a change eventually. So you might as well differentiate the render files by the version of the timeline that you're actually conforming and color correcting. So put it there. Okay. Make sure entire timeline is enabled and hit add to render queue. And you can double click on this job, this little label here, and just give it a name just so you know what this is. So this is 30 V06G, and then I render it. So what we're doing now is just, obviously we haven't done any color correction, but we're rendering the files the basic placeholder files for the Premiere Online project. You do this even before you start the color correction because you want to set up the online project. So when we do the color correction, you want to set up that online project for like the final client screening and stuff. So you're not wasting time relinking things in that online project. If a client is saying, oh, I want to change the color on that and do something different with it, all you have to do is go back and resolve, change the color in it, hit render only that clip, and it automatically shows back in the Premiere timeline. So it's a time saver when you're dealing with clients and stuff. So this is why I like to do this the first thing. Okay, so I rendered all the files. Let's go to the Resolve Render folder. So you can see there it is. So now what we'll do is create an online project. I have a little terminal script that creates the folder hierarchy for me, but you can obviously do it manually. So here's the online. So in this P-Pro Online folder, so I'll just name it the same as whatever the conform project is, except I'll call it online. And I like to tag the version of Creative Cloud that this project is for, just so you don't accidentally open it up in an older version or a newer version, and you waste all your time waiting for that damn Premiere to load and realize that's not the right version because you don't want to convert it to different versions. So open it up. This is an old project. Just overwrite it because it's an old version of Premiere, the template I created. Okay, so I got the conform project up here, and let's find where did the online project go? Okay, so here's the online project. So now our task now is to, in this conform project, I'm going to go back to the offline import thing, and I'm going to drag this into the online project. Before I do that though, again, because I don't need audio, I almost never need audio because it usually comes in from a mix. I just get a WAV file. I don't really want to bring in audio files I don't need. Okay, so just get rid of that. Okay, so now I'll just drag this offline project into my online project. And again, because all that stuff is already in this DLM bins, it just all the stuff for the offline ends up in there. So it keeps my project neat. So close the conform project. I don't need it anymore. I will bring in the reference movies again. Okay, so there's the reference, and here's the offline. So I'll copy the offline project, drag it into the online bin. So I'm now going to promote this offline to an online project. So I'll call it online. And the first thing I do when I open up that online project is make sure to change the codec for the timeline to match the codec of whatever I rendered out in Resolve. So in this case, it was ProRes 422. And make sure max bit that is enabled. And make sure the frame rate, so everything is good. So hit OK. So the idea is we're going to overlay the Resolve renders over this offline and keep the offline clips underneath it in case we need to copy and paste attributes from the original footage to the color corrected clips. Okay, and then the graphics, I'll just push it up just so it shows up over it. Okay. So now we go to From Resolve. This is where we're going to import the Resolve renders. So hit Command-I to import. So we're going to point this to the XML file that Resolve wrote. So if you go to color, back to the color, and then render, Resolve renders folder. So here's the XML file Resolve wrote. Sometimes they won't write it. I'm not sure. There's some some situations when you're in that deliver page in Resolve, and if you do something, for some reason doesn't write the XML files over. If that happens, just let me know, whatever, and I'll give you a workaround for that. Import. Okay, so there it is. So open up this sequence that I created. First thing I do, I'll change the color of these clips, and I like to change it to like mango or something, just to really make it obvious that this is the rendered color corrected clips. And then I copy, and then come to the online sequence, and then paste over the original clips, offline clips. Paste, okay. And we can bring this down. And then finally, I will re-import the offline reference over everything. Okay, that way I can go difference and do the same thing we did in Resolve. One thing you want to do is, when you're doing this, is a little known new keyboard shortcut that Premiere added. So if you do a search for difference, this set opacity blend mode difference. That is a shortcut you definitely want to map to a keyboard shortcut, because otherwise you have to go down to this and keep dragging it to difference and normal. That's a real pain in the butt. And they only added this shortcut, I think, in 2020. So I didn't realize it until a couple months ago. So that's like a gift from God. So I would recommend that you map this to a keyboard shortcut. So let's just, I'll just map it to like Command Option D, and then type the word normal, and then also map a shortcut for normal. So Command Option, well, looks like N is taken. So we'll just do whatever's next to it. This is obviously to your preference, but just for the sake of this video, I'll do it next to each other. So that way you can go Command Option F, it switches the blend mode to normal, and then Command Option D switches it to, oh, okay, that was a mistake. Command Option D turns out to be the shortcut, the Mac OS shortcut for hiding the dock, as you can see. So let me go back to keyboard shortcuts and go back to difference. So I was wondering why it wasn't working. So instead of Command Option D, I will go Command Option Control D, which is actually doing that is kind of good, because it's rare that you have a keyboard shortcut that uses all three modifier keys. I'm going to do the same thing for normal. Let's do add frame hold. Well, okay. Well, since I never use a shortcut for add frame hold because I'm not editing, maybe I can afford to use that as the shortcut. So this is obviously to your preference. So I'm going to just overwrite that. Okay, so now I can go Command Option D, Command Option F. Oh, well, as it turns out, Command Option Control F. Command Option Control F actually makes it full screen. So, well, you can never win with these shortcuts. You just got to find something that doesn't conflict with an existing shortcut. So let's clear this. I'll go Command Option Shift C, and hopefully nothing conflicts with it outside of Premiere. So let's try that. There you go. So I can go Command Option. There you go. Okay, so what you can see here now, obviously, is if we go Command Option Shift normal, and then another shortcut I like to map is this clip enable shortcut. I map it to Command Shift X, so I can just quickly turn it on and off. And obviously, you can see the scale of the Resolve clip is big. That's because we rendered it with that source clip resolution rather than forcing it to 1080. So in this case, let's bring it back to difference mode. So now what you can do is copy attributes. So you copy the attributes of the offline clip, hit V, Command or Option V to paste attributes. Oh, you can see, look at that. Okay, we don't want to paste Lumetri color. We just want to paste motion. Oh, and also scale to frame size. Okay. That's going to be dependent on how the editor the size of the proxies or how the editors change it here. So there's no one hard fast rule to that. You basically kind of go through all those options until it registers. So we just keep going clip to clip. So the first thing, actually, one thing you can do is just kind of just apply scale to frame size to everything. It may not be the right setting for that clip, but at least you can start a great majority of clips that will work, unless you've done a lot of scaling or something on it. So we did it to this. And now we copy the attributes from here, the offline clip, onto the online clip. Okay, so in this case, for some reason, this is not registering positionally. So it looks like the frame is correct. It's just the scale is off. Oh, I see. Yeah. So I think what happened here, let's enable the preview area in the project. So if we reveal this in the project, the original offline edit. Okay, so this is that 1920 by, this is a 1920 by 1336 proxy file, which has that weird aspect ratio. It's almost like a square aspect ratio. Let's reveal the color corrected version, the original. So 4480 by 3096. So actually this is we're learning this process as we go along. So what actually should have happened in the offline, you should always enable set scale to frame size. In this case, these clips were not edited with scale to frame size turned on. So any kind of value you do, if you go scale to frame size here, turn this on, scale to frame size. Okay, yeah. So that was the error in the workflow in this particular case, because these are weird proxies and we're mixing all different kinds of aspect ratios really. And we also downscale the proxies, the resolutions of the proxies. When you edit with those proxies, you should set it to scale to frame size, because otherwise you can't just copy and paste the position and scale settings to the high resolution versions of the clip. It's just not going to work. So it's not that big a deal, but if you can, you can obviously, now we're going to have to eyeball the scaling of this now. So that's kind of a bummer, but it's not the end of the world. But if we can avoid doing that, it would be good if we could avoid that. Okay, so in this case, you're going to have to kind of eyeball it. So I'll make a note for Deb that, in fact, we should turn off scale to frame size. And yeah, so you should just be able to manually scrub it and just eyeball it. Unless there's visual effects, a visual effects person is working on this shot to do removals. You don't have to be super exact. Just get it close enough. Don't kill yourself with getting that exact. Yeah, I mean, that's close enough. As long as the actual frames match, that is the most important thing. So for this particular example, it's not the best example of how this workflow should work, but it's a good example of the curveballs you get thrown when you do things like this. So just go in and obviously get everything aligned to the reference movie. And if you have, what will definitely happen is, let's see if we can find a speed change. Things like speed changes and reversals tend to just completely get mangled in the round trip back to Premiere. Let's see if I can find a clip like that. I mean, this isn't too bad, 88.75 versus 90, but it's obviously incorrect, right? So you can just change speed, change to match 90%, and then slip that into registration. Let's see if we have a reversal. Reversals, I find almost for some reason, reversals always come in back from Resolve totally off. So you need to, let me see, let's go here. Oh, here's an example. So here's a reversal, the original clip. This came back as minus 43.48, which is completely off. So you definitely need to first remove, change it to 100. I don't know why Premiere does that. It just, see, it does that. I don't know why. Yeah. So if you turn off reverse speed and then re-enable it, then it'll go back into registration. So theoretically, you should be able to slip based on the time codes. Sometimes I find that's not always true, but theoretically it does. That's how you do it. Okay, so now we can compare. It's like one frame off. Even though time codes are the same. Actually, if we compare these two clips, yeah, it's weird. Sometimes the time code in the file that Premiere sees from Resolve, it matches, but it's visually one frame off. That's kind of, I'm not sure why it does that. But what matters more is visually if it matches. If the time code is off one, that doesn't matter. What matters is, does it match the reference exactly? So even if you have to slip it, now you can see the time codes are one frame off. That's fine as long as it visually matches the reference. Okay, so you just go in and fix all that stuff, and hopefully the next timeline we work on, all the scale to frame size will be enabled when you edit, and this will be a lot easier. You won't have to manually rescale it to match. So you learn something every day when you do these weird conforms and new workflows. So. Okay, so that should be it. And then once that's done, all the graphics and stuff from the offline should obviously still be in place. And if you get an audio mix, we lay it into this. So, and then when you're done from that point, you got everything matched up. Then you can obviously delete all the old offline clips and then pull this down to V1, and everything will be prepped. So that's super handy. So when I do the actual color correction, I'll just do the color correction and just select this render queue item you did for the initial placeholder renders, and I just hit render again, and everything will just show up automatically in Premiere. I don't have to do anything. So that's why I like to set it up like that. So hopefully this gives you the idea of the conform process. And any questions, let me know.